NATO is estimating that up to 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the past month of fighting in Ukraine. That information was released ahead of a NATO summit in Brussels that begins tomorrow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to address NATO then. And President Biden spoke today ahead of his trip to Brussels, warning that Russia may start using chemical weapons in its war in Ukraine. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ben Hodges joins me now. He is a former commanding general who led U.S. forces in Europe from 2014 to 2017. General, thank you for being with us. Poland is announcing plans for a NATO peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, something the Kremlin says would be a, quote, extremely dangerous decision. What will it take for this to actually happen, and what are you watching?
Robert, thank you. Of course, to have a peacekeeping force, there has to be a peace to keep. And so there would have to be some sort of an agreement, ideally a UN mandate, something like that. And it just seems to me unlikely that Russia would actually go along with anything unless they were going to get huge advantage from it. But I love Poland is always pushing forth initiatives, trying to find ways to stop the killing, but also to protect this young democracy of Ukraine. And this is the thing that we all have to remember. This is about democracy versus autocracy. And I hope that the president, with all of his fellow leaders in Brussels this week, will talk about this is about democracy winning. And not willing to accept a situation where Russia, the autocracy here, is rewarded for what they've done.
General, in terms of winning and losing, a new NATO assessment shows Russia might have lost as much as 1/5 of its combat forces in roughly a month. What is the significance of that in terms of the next phase of this conflict?
Well, Robert, you're touching on a very important point. I believe that we are in the decisive phase of this campaign, what Clausewitz calls the culminating point. And those casualties are part of the reason that Russia no longer has the ability to conduct sustained land offensive operations. Now, they can continue to murder Ukrainian citizens by launching missiles and artillery into towns, but they just don't have the ability, the logistics, the manpower to push Ukrainian forces around. And in fact, what we're starting to see are very proactive Ukrainian forces that are counterattacking, and you can kind of feel the momentum shifting. So we're in a very important phase here, and I hope that the leaders meeting in Brussels will just say, okay, now is the time to pour on the resources, get Ukraine what they need. Now is not the time to hesitate or start looking for the exit somehow.
General, you say things may be changing on the ground, but in the air, Russia claims to have deployed hypersonic missiles last week. So what does that claim and the possible use of those missiles say about Russian operations and strategy?
Well, of course, the missiles that they're using are all intended to smash cities, to punish the Ukrainian government, and to put millions of refugees on the road, so that puts pressure on the Zelensky government as well as on European governments, and to get people to say, for the love of God, please stop this. Let's sign an agreement so this will stop. That's the whole reason that they're doing it. The Russian Air Force actually does not dare to go into Ukrainian airspace very much. And the missiles like the one you're showing there, they're able to launch these from Russian airspace because it is quite dangerous for Russian aircraft to fly over Ukraine. So we've got to figure out a way to be able to knock down missiles, but also, frankly, most of the damage is being done by the Russian Navy launching cruise missiles into town, into cities, and then Russian artillery and rockets that are firing from inside Russia or inside Ukraine. So giving the Ukrainians the ability to identify the location and hit those, as well as be able to knock down some of these missiles. Now, the hypersonic missile that has been talked about, actually, other than the fact that it's a little bit more difficult to knock down, the warhead that it carries is not any more devastating. It's terrible, but it's not a special kind of warhead. It's just harder to knock down. I'm not sure how many of these they have. They're pretty expensive. I don't imagine they have unlimited amounts, but I wouldn't want to be where one hits for sure.
General, a quick question. Beyond the hypersonic missiles, President Biden said today there's a possibility of a chemical attack by Russia. He called it a, quote, real threat. So what's Russia's track record of using them, and what do we know about just how real that threat is?
I think it is a real threat, Robert. Putin used nerve agent on his own people, on the opposition. So a guy that'll use poison on fellow citizens will not be too squeamish about using some kind of a chemical agent on one of these cities or in some set of circumstances. However, I'm not convinced he actually will do it, even though he could do it. First of all, there's not a significant operational, practical advantage to doing it. I mean, the casualties caused by using some of the type of agents that they would likely use, similar to what was used in Syria, would not be dramatically different from the way that they're already murdering Ukrainian civilians with artillery and rockets and cruise missiles and so on. But yet using a chemical weapon sort of puts this whole thing in a different category, and the pressure on our governments will be immense to do something. So it actually, in my view, would backfire on the Kremlin to do it. I suspect that people around Putin right now, they can see that this is going to end bad. I mean, the serious people around President Putin see that there are zero positive outcomes for Russia, no matter what happens in the next several weeks. And so I think they've got to be thinking, what's my life going to be like after Putin's gone or after there's some kind of agreement? And so I think I'm just not convinced that the Kremlin is prepared to actually do that, even less so with a nuclear weapon. And so I think that we have been limiting ourselves too much. We are too hesitant. We're too worried about this. And I don't think that the likelihood of a significant use of a chemical weapon is that great.
We will keep tracking it. General Ben Hodges, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for the privilege, Robert.